Thanks, Robin, and look, thanks very much for the opportunity to talk with you today. And I know we've got a big crowd. It's quite difficult at this time of year when you're a farmer or a grower to get out and about. So I appreciate you've taken time out of your busy days to come along. So look, I've been asked to sort of set off today, and I'm going to keep it at a relatively high level because we could get into detail around some of these issues, and I have been in some of the detail on these issues over the last few years, but I'll set the scene and then we'll look at how we take the discussion from there. So look, I've noted the theme of the conference today and obviously inspiring resilience and profitability for future farming. And so I'm trying to tackle it along those lines. And I want to firstly just make an observation. And I don't think, it's difficult to encourage farmers to do the right thing. And when I say farmers and growers when it comes to sustainability initiatives. And I think most farmers are actually truly intergenerational and they care deeply about the resources that we have here in New Zealand. And I often think that those that don't do the right thing do so because of a few reasons. Either they don't understand the impacts of what they're currently doing, they don't have enough knowledge to change, or they're financially constrained. And that's tough when you actually want to do the right thing, but in actual fact you don't know what you need to do. And equally, you may not be financially well enough off to be able to make those sort of implementation changes that need to happen. So, I always say that regulation and compliance should always be the last thing we use to bring people along the journey for change. But unfortunately, sometimes at the moment it seems like we've jumped to that being the first thing that we use. And that usually just turns farmers off. And we had a good example of that in the past 12 months. With the emissions reduction efforts around Hawaii Kanoa. Just a couple of other things as an observation. We've obviously had a change in the political landscape, and I've been asked by a number of people about whether that will make any difference. Look, the reality is, in my view, the direction of travel will stay the same. But there will be some changes, and there will also be some changes in probably the timetable and the pace with which some of those changes will look to be imposed. Emissions pricing is a classic example where we were looking at a timetable of 2025, and I think it's quite clear now that timetable will push out to somewhere more like 2030. But for me, the most important thing about that whole discussion and debate is the reporting of emissions. That's the most important thing. Give farmers the tools to understand how they're performing relative to others, and they will make the changes. I have no doubt about that. And I'll touch on some of that in a bit later in this presentation. The second point I just thought I'd make is that we actually have had a real problem and that the aspirations of the leaders have been difficult to convey to the wider population of farmers and growers. And in actual fact, at leadership level, there's a really good understanding about what needs to be done and how we can go about doing that. But they have not taken the people with them. We saw that with the groundswell movement down south. That really sort of came together around emissions pricing and SNAs and some of those other difficult conversations around fresh water and winter grazing and those types of rules. And the reality is, I think even the leaders would accept that they just did not take the people with them when they were engaging on these issues of quite significant importance. So, look, I think the will is there. I genuinely think farmers want to do the right thing. And actually we just now need to sort of take a step back and work out how we can make that happen. So I see in the advertising for this, it said that Mike will speak to aligning the farming practices with overseas market expectations. So I thought what I'd do is I'd go back and say, well, actually, let's have a look at what people in our markets really think. And fortunately, NZTE and Kantar carried out some market research very recently. And so I've been able to bring some of those slides here today. It's only 5 or 6 markets, but it actually gives us a sense of what they think about New Zealand, what our food and production systems are really like. So as I say, partnered with Kantar, they looked at trying to break down the key purchase drivers of shoppers in 6 major export markets. They talked to about 14,000 household shoppers to examine what drives purchases within 8 different categories. In 29 subcategories. So you'll see there the markets they went to: China, Japan, Singapore, Australia, USA, UK, and then they looked at each of those 8 different categories on the right. There were some interesting findings. When you looked at the 14,000 household shoppers, they actually determined 8 key drivers for people who are prepared to buy at different levels of the food tree. And you can see them ranking from the bottom there, the 8 key drivers that they sorted out: affordable, tasty, fresh, a trusted brand, healthy, safe product, on trend, and ethical. And the higher up that ladder they went, the more they were prepared to pay. Now that's probably no surprise to you at all, because one of the things we think about in New Zealand is that actually we are really premium producers of food, and everyone wants to buy our products. And in actual fact, we've still got a bit of work to do in that area. When you go and interview those shoppers and you say, which countries are known as premium food and beverage producers? In fact, New Zealand on an average basis comes out 5th. The top countries that were quoted by shoppers were France, Italy, Japan. Australia was ahead of us, not in the World Cup, but they were ahead of us on this measure, and New Zealand. And you can see there that in each of those markets it's slightly different. But it does sort of, raise a point to me that, we actually think that we're pretty good, and we are very good, but we've still got a bit of work to do. And I thought this was quite an interesting insight. If you look at the products that shoppers associated most with New Zealand, it's really good to see a good New Zealand product, a good Hawke's Bay product there. Wine, of course, leading the charge. And then red meat and, for example, lamb and beef come next, and then cheese and dairy are third. So again, maybe no surprises there, but there is an opportunity there, we think, to look at how you can link with the wine industry and promote some of those other products as well. But I thought that this was quite good, and we'll just spend a little bit of time on this so you understand what we're talking about here. This is about how we're perceived in 5 key markets, and you've got along the top there New Zealand, Australia, Japan, Italy and France as those products. And we look at the impact on preference, and the percentage along the bottom there actually goes from 0 to 60%. Apologies, I didn't realise the screen was going to be so small here, so hopefully you can read that. But you can see New Zealand as the black dot. And in each of those categories that consumers talk about when they're looking at their preference for buying food from each country, New Zealand actually is almost, at the bottom end of those countries. There are 2 exceptions that stand out. Recognised for producing great tasting lamb and beef and lamb, it's second to the bottom, and actually dairy rates relatively highly as well. And sustainability, of course, we actually rate as high as any of the other countries, but we're still talking at about 40% of shoppers or less, slightly less. So, if we talk about great tasting products, we're not as high as those other countries at the moment. And as you say, you work down that impact on preference, and it shows again that we've got some work to do. So this is no criticism of New Zealand companies, but I think sometimes when I travel around the world, and I've just been in China 2 weeks ago, and everyone thinks that New Zealand has these wonderful products here in New Zealand, and we do. But actually, when you travel into those markets and you talk to some consumers, sometimes we're not as highly as regarded as we think we are. So let's keep working on it. So what do we know about these consumers? This is the research work from Kantar. Well, those 8 drivers of preference I talked about, each of them are different in different markets. We just say New Zealand's not the most recognised country for premium products. But we rank the highest for sustainability and ethical drivers. And while we do that, unfortunately, they're not the key drivers of preference yet in some of our key markets. And I'll talk about that in a minute. So there's some more work to do, but we're keen to push on and do that as quickly as we can. So where are our future customers and what are their expectations? And I thought firstly we'd look at where our current customers are. New Zealand's top 10 food and fibre export markets for the year ending 31st of March 2023, so this is relatively new data. 34% of all of our products went to China, 10% to the US, 8% to Australia, EU is 6%, excluding the UK of course, which is about 2%. And then of course Japan, South Korea down the chain. So we still have a very heavy reliance on China, and when it comes to sustainability preferences, actually most Chinese customers don't really care about that at this stage. They will, and there are more people moving into that middle class really quickly, and there is a high end in China that absolutely do want the credentials that New Zealand can offer, but that's where our markets currently are. If we look at the growth markets forecast out to 2050, and you can see the big growth markets there. If you look at India, it's hard to believe, isn't it? India, Nigeria, Vietnam, Indonesia, the Philippines, China. They are the biggest growth markets, the growth engines in the world. And of course, they're also not the people that pay the most. The people that pay the most and the people that we're looking to target are really down the bottom end of that cluster in the bottom left corner. But it is interesting to see where the growth is going to come from. Phenomenal growth in India, of course. As I said, I was in China 2 weeks ago. They are going to shrink as a country in population terms. In fact, by 2100, I know that's a long time away, under the current birth rate projections and death projections, they're only multiplying at just over 1.2 children per couple. They will have 40% less people in China in 2100 than they do today. So, just think about that and think about why there's so much talk here about India as such a great opportunity for New Zealand. So, I've always held this view, of course, is that New Zealand cannot feed the world, nor should it aspire to try to, or to solve the world's hunger issues or hunger problems. That's not what we can do. We can provide high quality, safe food with integrity. We can also make sure that others are implementing our practices and adopting our methods where possible to try and help address their own issues. And that's, quite a big opportunity for us, I think, when we go to other countries around the world. So the opportunity for New Zealand, as I say, is to create higher value opportunities. I think we'd all accept that when it comes to footprints on the ground in the livestock sector, we aren't in the position where we're looking to increase more cattle or dairy cows, for example. But what we want to do is increase our performance while also improving our efficiency. And so what does New Zealand have to do to improve our ability to navigate the pace of change and secure higher returns? And I've got 10 things I've put down here. And I'm going to, as I say, stay at a high level, but hopefully, Robin, in the questions, we'll get onto it. Okay. Right, firstly, recognise our markets are changing and securing higher returns will require a different approach. Okay, so, we need to look at markets and segments. We need to break them down by customers, and that's how we will definitely make a difference when it comes to securing higher returns. Number 2, geopolitics and international trade has become more challenged and inward-looking. I still talk a fair bit with the negotiators. This is a major challenge every day for us. It's a threat for us, and we must remain politically savvy when it comes to dealing with those geopolitical discussions. Number 3, commercial drivers and customers will determine the pace of change for sustainability credentials, in my view. Regulation and compliance-driven programs will only alienate farmers and growers and hinder progress, and there's plenty of those around. Number 4, sustainable production and supply chains are increasingly being rewarded. There's a number of people in the room here that are involved with programs through companies like Atkins Ranch. Ignore this at your peril, keep pushing that way, and be ahead of the rest. Our competitors are catching up. I know there's an article in Farmers Weekly about the Irish, and yes, they talk a good game, the Irish, and they have been making really good progress, but they've still got some work to do just like us. Number 5, we must pass the ethical test when it comes from food and products. Animal welfare is non-negotiable, biodiversity is increasingly important, and consumers are looking to those traits as an ability to access markets. Number 6, climate change is the burning platform. I know I've been saying this for about 10 years now, and emissions reduction is our biggest challenge and also our biggest opportunity. Sustainability will be measured in carbon first and foremost, and those that don't believe that, I see this happen in markets all around the world at the moment. This will be the currency people are talking about. Number 7, I'm a huge believer in science and innovation. And I think this will unlock the keys to enable our progress. I'm also a big supporter of private sector investment. AgriZero is a great initiative with 6 companies, one of which I'm involved with, who've put their money on the table to really help with the innovation efforts. Innovation will help us solve these big challenges and will turbocharge our efforts. Number 8, sustainable finance is real. This is not a conspiracy, a global conspiracy like some seem to think. Money is going green, and this will incentivise the behavioural change and practices that we need to adopt on farm and in orchards. Number 9, food security and food sovereignty concerns are really increasing. Big food companies are under pressure. You can see that's why they're often leading the charge when it comes to things like Scope 3 emissions. The likes of Nestle, Danone, Tesco, Sainsbury, these are the companies that are going to start to demand Scope 3 reporting and to make sure their emissions through their supply chain are reducing or hopefully getting to net zero. We will get caught in this as an ingredient supplier. In Scales, as a pet food ingredient supplier, we're being asked already for our emissions reductions plans for pet food. This is non-edible. Locavores are increasing in number, those that like to buy their food from within a 50-kilometre radius. And number 10, I actually think that we need to reinforce that farmers and growers aren't alone. We have an incredible ecosystem here of professional service and support around farmers and growers to assist them with this transition. So what we're talking about here is evolution, not revolution. It's one of the advantages that New Zealand has. Our ecosystem of service and support is unparalleled, and farmers shouldn't feel alone in having to make these changes. So ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, I'll leave you to read that. As Robin's tapping the floor, as a small country reliant on the world for a living, I've always argued we have to do more and go further. Change is coming, and disruption is actually about opportunity for us, and irrelevance awaits those who ignore that. Customers and commercial drivers will actually drive this, in my view, much faster than regulatory and compliance, and expectations are higher. Animal welfare, biodiversity, I've talked about all of those. Ignore all sustainability at your peril and be ahead of the rest. And sustainable finance is here, and in fact, I think that's going to move quite quickly to encourage farmers and growers to do the right thing. Thank you very much.